Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thanks, Chris. It is great to be here because today we are unpacking a story that really does feel like a turning point in how the most powerful AI models actually reach the rest of us.
So let us set the stage for everyone listening, because the headline alone is the kind of thing that makes you stop scrolling and read the whole article twice over.
Right, so on Friday, June 26, 2026, OpenAI launched its newest flagship, GPT-5.6, and it did not arrive the way these launches usually arrive at all.
And normally when OpenAI ships a new flagship, the whole world gets to poke at it within hours. Everybody races to run benchmarks, and the memes start flying almost immediately, right?
Exactly. But this time, access was deliberately throttled down to roughly 20 companies. And every single one of those companies had to have its participation approved by the United States government first.
Okay, that detail is the part that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. So walk me through what this GPT 5.6 release actually contains before we get to the politics.
Sure, so it ships in 3 flavors with names borrowed from the sky: Sol, Terra, and Luna. And each one is tuned for a very different slice of the market and a very different budget.
I love that they went with the celestial branding, but tell me what actually separates these 3 tiers. Because on the surface, those names do not tell a customer very much about capability.
So Sol is the powerhouse, built for frontier reasoning and long-horizon agentic work. Terra is the balanced middle option at roughly half the cost of GPT 5.5, and Luna is the speed and affordability play.
And the pricing tells the same story, because I was looking at the numbers, and the spread between the top tier and the bottom tier is honestly pretty dramatic when you lay it all out.
It really is. So Sol runs $5 for input and $30 for output per million tokens. Terra is $2.50 and $15. And Luna drops all the way to $1 and $6.
So Luna is aimed squarely at the high volume, cost-sensitive crowd, the people running millions of routine calls where every fraction of a cent multiplied across the whole fleet really starts to add up fast.
Precisely. And OpenAI also teased some extra muscle on top, including options for deeper reasoning and a so-called ultra mode that splits a single hard job across multiple cooperating sub-agents working in parallel.
All right, so on paper, this is a strong, well-segmented lineup, but none of that is the actual story today. Because the real story is who was allowed to touch it and who decided that.
That is the heart of it, because OpenAI agreed to limit the rollout after a direct request from the Trump administration, which cited national security concerns as the reason for holding the broad launch back.
And I want to be really precise here for our listeners. Because this is not the government banning a model or seizing anything, it is something subtler and arguably more consequential over the long run.
Right. This is the first time a United States administration has preemptively asked an American AI company to limit a model's availability before a broad public launch, rather than reacting to a problem after the fact.
That word preemptively is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, because it basically reframes a frontier model as a product that needs a government review pass before it can ship widely.
And this did not come completely out of nowhere either, because the very same thing had already happened to Anthropic with its powerful Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models just a little earlier this season.
So that is a pattern forming rather than a one-off. And I think that distinction matters a lot, because one company getting a special request can be dismissed as a unique edge case.
Exactly. And OpenAI itself made that point, noting that Anthropic is no longer being singled out, which suggests this is quietly becoming the default posture for any lab shipping something near the genuine frontier.
So let us talk about the actual concern driving this, because national security is a big phrase, and I want to know what specifically about these models is making Washington nervous enough to intervene.
The center of gravity here is cybersecurity capability, because each new generation of these models gets meaningfully better at understanding code, finding software flaws, and reasoning through the kind of work that security professionals do every day.
And that is a genuine double-edged sword, because the exact same skill that lets a model help a defender patch a hole could, in principle, help an attacker find that same hole first.
That is the tension exactly, and OpenAI's own framing tries to thread that needle, arguing that Sol is better at helping people find and fix vulnerabilities than it is at reliably carrying out end-to-end attacks.
I want to push on that a little, because that is a comforting sentence, but find and fix versus carry out an attack is a spectrum, not a clean line. So how confident should we really be?
That is a fair challenge, and OpenAI leans on its preparedness framework here, saying the model does not cross the critical threshold they defined for cyber risk. even though its capabilities clearly went up another notch.
So essentially, they're saying it is more capable than the last one, but still below the red line they drew for themselves. Which, of course, raises the question of who gets to verify that claim.
And that is precisely where the government steps in, because there is now an executive order, signed back on June 2nd, 2026, that sets up the machinery to answer exactly that verification question.
Tell me about that executive order, because I think a lot of people heard it went by in early June, but did not fully register what it actually obligates the government to go and build.
So, under that order, by August, the administration has to stand up a classified process to assess the cyber capabilities of new AI models and decide which ones qualify as so-called covered frontier models.
Covered frontier models. So that is going to become a real regulatory category with real consequences attached. The way we talk about controlled technologies or export restricted hardware and other corners of the economy.
That is the direction this is heading. And what makes the GPT 5.6 moment so interesting is that it is happening in the awkward gap before that formal process even exists yet.
Right, so OpenAI is essentially being asked to comply with a framework that has been announced, but not actually written, which has to be a strange and, frankly, uncomfortable position for any company to operate in.
It is, and to their credit, OpenAI did not just quietly accept it, they pushed back in public, saying they do not believe this kind of government access process should become the long-term default going forward.
I actually wrote that line down because it was sharper than the usual corporate diplomacy, so remind everyone exactly how they phrased their objection, because the specific wording really does tell you where their real worry sits.
They said it keeps the best tools away from users, developers, enterprises, cyber defenders, and global partners who need them, which is a pointed argument that gating the model might actually weaken the defensive side, too.
And that is a genuinely clever counterargument, because the very cyber capability that makes Washington nervous is the same capability that defenders desperately want in their own hands to keep pace with increasingly sophisticated attackers out there.
Exactly. So if you slow walk the model to the good guys while the underlying techniques eventually leak or get reproduced anyway, you might end up handing a timing advantage to precisely the people you fear most.
So why is OpenAI going along with it at all, given that they clearly think the approach is flawed? Because nothing stops them from simply shipping broadly and daring the government to actually respond.
Their stated logic is pragmatic. They framed it as a short-term step they are taking because they believe it is the strongest path to a broad release, while they help shape the cyber executive order framework itself.
So they are trading a few weeks of restricted access now for a seat at the table where the permanent rules get written, which honestly might be the most valuable real estate in this entire story.
That is a smart read, because whoever helps design that repeatable review process effectively sets the speed limit for every future model launch. And being inside the room when that gets drafted is worth quite a lot.
And we should be clear about the timeline they are promising, because this is not framed as some indefinite lockdown. It is being sold to everyone as a very temporary and very deliberately narrow staging period.
Right. OpenAI said it expects to expand access to more companies within about a week, with a broad public release following in the coming weeks. And the government reportedly supports that plan, barring new concerns in testing.
Before we zoom all the way out, I want to touch the global angle, because the United States is not the only government watching this, and every move Washington makes here is studied very closely abroad.
That is a crucial point, because if American labs are now staging releases through a national security review, rival ecosystems may either copy that caution or race ahead to win over developers frustrated by the wait.
And there is a real competitiveness paradox lurking in there, because the same restrictions meant to protect the country could, if they overshoot, end up slowing the very companies the policy is trying to keep ahead.
Exactly. And you can hear that worry inside OpenAI's own statement, where they stress they still believe the administration has the best interests of American AI competitiveness in mind despite these unusually heavy-handed recent moves.
Let us also think about the 20 companies who actually did get in, because being on a government-approved shortlist for the most capable model on Earth is a genuinely extraordinary and slightly surreal position to occupy.
It really is, and those firms get a head start measured in weeks on frontier reasoning and agentic tooling, which in a fast-moving market can translate into a meaningful and surprisingly durable competitive edge.
So pull the lens back for me, because if I am a developer or a startup founder listening to this right now, what is the practical takeaway about how my access to frontier tools might change?
The honest takeaway is that the era of instant, universal, day-one access to the most powerful models may be quietly ending. at least for the genuine frontier tier with serious cyber and biological capability.
And that is a real shift in the social contract of this industry, because so much of the last few years was built on the promise that the newest capability would be just an API call away.
It is, and there is a real equity question buried in here too. Because if access flows first to a government-approved shortlist of large companies, smaller players could find themselves a full generation behind.
That is the part that worries me most, because the whole disruptive promise of this technology was that a tiny team could punch far above its weight. And gated access quietly tilts the field back toward incumbents.
And yet the counterweight is real, because if these capabilities genuinely approach the level where they could meaningfully help someone cause large-scale harm, then a few weeks of careful staging does not seem unreasonable at all.
So we are landing in that classic hard place where both sides actually have a point. And the answer is going to live in the messy details of how that covered frontier process gets designed.
That is exactly it. And the next real milestone to watch is August, when that classified assessment process is supposed to exist. Because that is when this fuzzy, improvised moment finally becomes concrete and durable policy.
So to sum it up for everyone, a flagship model launched not to the world, but to 20 pre-cleared companies. A pattern is forming, and a brand new regulatory category is being born in real time.
Beautifully put, and whether you see this as prudent caution or as a worrying precedent, it is undeniably one of the most consequential shifts in how frontier AI reaches the world that we have seen yet.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.